I want to start this evening with CNN's Jim Sciutto, who is joining me on the phone on this breaking news. Jim, I just want to first get your take on hearing that it doesn't appear this is formal yet, but if Trump is leaning in this direction, and that is what all of our sourcing is indicating at this hour, what the significance of a Marco Rubio as a Trump pick for Secretary of State would be in your view?
For one, it very much, Caitlin, puts China at the center of Trump's foreign policy, the combination of Rubio and Waltz, both of whom are big China hawks. Rubio's portfolio on China goes back years. He's drawn attention to China's trade practices. He's pushed for restrictions on selling advanced technology to China. He's highlighted China's mass incarceration and forced labor of Uyghurs in Xinjiang, as well as China's intelligence gathering inside this country. So he has a deep and long resume on China. And listen, it shouldn't be surprising, given that Trump himself, of course, has made China a target both of his national security policy, but also his economic policy, the discussions during the campaign of imposing significant tariffs on Chinese goods. This would bring to his team a Rubio and a Waltz, two individuals with history there and focus on China. I'll say this as well, that given the concern about some of Trump's foreign policy positions, particularly among Democrats, the outgoing Biden administration, but also some more traditional Republicans, I think it's safe to say that both Rubio and Waltz are not out there, as it were, right? That their positions on China are very common with other Republicans, but also, frankly, it's a bipartisan position right now in Washington, a far more aggressive China policy, both in terms of national security and trade. Their positions on Ukraine, for instance, Rubio has been a skeptic of additional aid going there. He, like other Republicans, has said it's time to bring the war to an end, but he is not a Republican who has praised Russia. He's not a Republican who has denied Russia's blame for the invasion, right? So even as he has been skeptical of additional aid, he's not from the wing of the Republican Party that has questioned whether the U.S. should have been there in any way at all before.
Yeah, certainly a different view in that sense. Of course, the question is what happens now and with what we've seen on the ground. Jim Sciutto, thank you for that. And on this breaking news, I also want to bring in CNN anchor and chief congressional correspondent Manu Raju, because Manu, as we were looking at this, I just want to note what Kristen Holmes is reporting on top of this. She says that she heard from a source this morning who thought Trump was leaning toward Rick Grenell, of course, who served as his acting director of national intelligence. Before that, the U.S. ambassador to Germany. We know Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee was also in the running for these two positions, though he seemed to have fallen out of the contention a few hours ago. Manu, though, when you look at this, if this is what Trump ultimately formally goes with, and a caveat there just because it's Trump, I imagine Rubio would have a pretty easy time getting confirmed in the Senate.
Yeah, no question about that, Caitlin. In fact, if it were Rick Grenell, that could potentially have been a problem for some Republican senators here. Rubio is different, though. He's been a long-time senator. He's got a lot of allies in the Senate Republican Conference. He's one of those senators who has straddled both the Republican establishment world and the Trump MAGA world. And he has, despite of all of his criticism against Donald Trump back in 2016, he has very much aligned himself and been a chief defender of Donald Trump through his 4 years in office and on the campaign trail and the like. And his foreign policy views do align to some extent with the Republican establishment, but he also has broken with them as well. He did vote against the big foreign policy bill of this past year. That was a $95 billion aid package that included aid to Taiwan, aid to Israel, aid to Ukraine. He called it legislative blackmail, that bill. He contended that it should not have been all tied together. It should have done more should have went after border security issues as well, even as Ukraine was clamoring for that money at that critical moment earlier this year. So he has broken from a lot of his colleagues, including the Republican leadership, on that issue, but he is very much on Trump's side here. And assuming this pick goes through, I do expect him probably have no problems to get confirmed. But if he is confirmed to this post, then that opens up a vacancy in Florida for a Senate seat. This would give the governor there, Ron DeSantis, the ability to name a replacement to that post. So it would not affect the current balance of power right now. But I can tell you, without talking to too many Republicans at the moment, with this news just breaking, I will be talking to a lot of them tomorrow. I can expect many of them will be happy to hear this news if it does happen. Marco Rubio getting this major pick for Secretary of State, someone they believe can carry out America's foreign policy effectively on the world stage. Caitlin.
Yeah, we saw his fellow Florida Senator Artie coming out and endorsing this idea on Twitter when New York Times first reported it. Manu, can I ask you that before you go, because we're also going to talk in a minute about the National Security Advisor pick and Mike Waltz, a Florida congressman. Now, 2 Florida lawmakers, it sounds like, are going to be inside the Trump administration. On that, with the House margin, of course, House Republicans were waiting to see if they have the majority here. It was already a pretty slim margin. I mean, obviously, Mike Waltz is in a pretty safe Republican district, but what would that mean, you know, in the time that it takes to call a special election if he's going there and Elise Stefanik is going to the United Nations in New York?
Yeah, it's not good news. In fact, I talked to a number of Republicans tonight in the aftermath of these 2 appointments moving ahead. They're making clear that they're not totally happy about this because they're worried that if Donald Trump were to name more Republicans to the post, that it would just make it even harder to pass bills in this Republican House. This majority, well, you're right. We don't know exactly if they do have the majority yet. They are on track to getting the Republican majority, but potentially we're looking at anywhere from 220 to 223 seats. We'll see what ultimately plays out for the Republicans. But each time they lose a member, it gets closer and closer to making it harder to pass bills, because if they lose 1 or 2 votes on any single bill, that could stop the entire Republican agenda. And not only that, Caitlin, there's also a big speaker's vote that has to happen on January 3rd. Mike Johnson is running for speaker, assuming they have the majority. He has very little margin for error if he's lost 2 votes already, 2 members already gone to the administration. Yeah. So a lot riding on the size of the Republican majority. And as hopeful Republicans, they hope Donald Trump doesn't pick more House Republicans.
Yeah, I'm sure Mike Johnson is keeping a close count of that. Manu, thank you for that. Also joining us on this breaking news is former Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger, who served on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, I just wonder, first, what is your initial reaction to the news that Trump is likely to pick Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it's actually pretty good news. You know, Marco Rubio has been obviously kind of changing. I think he even voted against Ukraine aid, which was very surprising when I learned that. But he's not by no means is he like a neocon. So obviously that was important for Donald Trump. But he's somebody that understands foreign policy, and that's going to be important. So as far as picks go, I think compared to some of the other names that were floating around, people that don't have any experience with foreign policy, I think this is a pretty good one.
I mean, what does it say to you about what foreign policy would look like in a second Trump term? Because, I mean, they are about to inherit massive crises that are playing out across the world, especially, obviously, Russia's war in Ukraine, as you just mentioned there. We've seen what Senator Rubio has said in the past about Putin and where that stands now. But also the war in Gaza. As a top aide to Benjamin Netanyahu is here in Palm Beach right now. As I speak, Barak Ravid reporting that he met with Donald Trump. I mean, these are real crises that they're about to confront, in addition to what they don't know they could be dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what the pick of Marco Rubio says for what their foreign policy is going to be. Again, and I'm willing to, give as much leeway as possible. But, Marco has shown his ability to kind of change for whatever Donald Trump demands. So it really comes down to what does Donald Trump demand? On the Russia issue, you just got to take Donald Trump at his word that he thinks he can solve this in 24 hours. And his vice president said, I don't care what happens in Ukraine. I hope, though, that in this process, they're actually going to be able to, if they're going to cut a deal with Russia, to cut a good deal, whatever that looks like, but one that makes sure that Ukraine is able to defend itself into the future. In terms of Israel, look, this is continuing to be just a really complicated issue. There's no doubt that I think they will put less constraints on Israel from this administration. I don't think that's a question, and probably will be much more aggressive at confronting Iran, because the current administration has been kind of like living under this idea that they can somehow resurrect the Iran nuclear deal. They're not going to be able to, and so definitely be more confrontational to Iran. And really quickly, if you look at it, Iran, North Korea, Russia, China is all kind of in axis at the moment. They're all in alliance. So all of that is going to be important.